In the spring of 1955, a curious question arrived at the desk of Albert Einstein. A young girl named Phyllis had written to ask the great scientist a simple yet profound question. Do you believe in God? Einstein's response would echo through decades, puzzling scholars and seekers alike. He wrote that he believed in Spinoza's God, who reveals himself in the orderly harmony of what exists, not in a God who concerns himself with the fates and actions of human beings. This single sentence opened a door to one of the most revolutionary philosophical visions ever conceived. But who was this Spinoza whose understanding of the divine could inspire the greatest mind of the 20th century? What kind of God did he envision that differed so dramatically from the bearded figure on a throne, judging humanity from above? The story begins in the narrow, winding streets of 17th century Amsterdam. The year is 1632. This city is alive with the sound of commerce, the salt smell of the sea, and the chatter of dozens of languages mixing in the air. Portuguese, Spanish, Dutch, Hebrew, all blending together in this remarkable haven of relative tolerance. Here, in this bustling centre of trade and ideas, a boy is born into a family of Jewish refugees who had fled the terrors of the Spanish Inquisition. His parents name him Baruch, which means blessed in Hebrew. Later he will Latinize this name to Benedictus, carrying the same meaning into a different tongue. The world will come to know him simply as Spinoza. Imagine the evening settling over Amsterdam as young Baruch walks along the canals. The water reflects the amber glow of oil lamps flickering in windows. Merchants are closing their shops, pulling heavy wooden shutters across storefronts filled with spices from the East Indies, fine cloth from across Europe, and books, so many books, carrying ideas from every corner of the known world. The Jewish quarter hums with the final prayers of the day. Voices rise in ancient melodies, the same songs that had been sung for thousands of years, connecting this small community to an unbroken chain of tradition, stretching back through centuries of persecution and survival. But young Baruch's mind is already wandering beyond these familiar boundaries. In his father's study, he has discovered works that speak of a different world. The writings of Maimonides, the great medieval Jewish philosopher who tried to reconcile faith with reason. The revolutionary ideas of René Descartes, the French philosopher who dared to doubt everything in his search for certain knowledge. Books about the new science of Galileo, who had looked through a telescope and seen moons orbiting Jupiter, proving that not everything in the heavens circled the earth. Each page turned was another crack in the edifice of received wisdom. The Jewish community of Amsterdam had survived by holding tight to tradition. After generations of hiding their faith, of pretending to be Christian while secretly practicing Jewish rituals, they had finally found a place where they could worship openly. The synagogue was not just a house of prayer, but a fortress of identity, a declaration that they had endured and would continue to endure. The rabbis guarded this hard-won freedom jealously. They understood that any hint of heresy, any suggestion that their community harbored dangerous freethinkers, could bring disaster upon them all. The Christian authorities of Amsterdam tolerated the Jews, but that tolerance was fragile, conditional, always one scandal away from being revoked. Baruch was being groomed to become a rabbi himself. His teachers recognized his brilliant mind, his facility with languages, his ability to pass the most complex Talmudic arguments. He studied Hebrew, Aramaic, and Latin. He learned the intricate debates of the ancient sages, the careful interpretations that had been layered upon the Torah over countless generations. But even as he excelled in his studies, questions began to form. Questions that had no easy answers. Questions that could not be asked aloud. Night falls completely now over the city. The canals grow dark and still. In a small room lit by a single candle, a young man sits with a book open before him. Outside, the city sleeps. Inside, a mind awakens to possibilities that will shake the foundations of philosophy and theology for centuries to come. The candle flame flickers, casting dancing shadows on the walls. In this quiet moment, between the old world and the new, between faith and reason, between what has always been believed and what might actually be true, a revolution begins to take shape. It will cost the young man everything he has known. It will lead to his expulsion from the only community he has ever called home. It will make his name a synonym for heresy and atheism. But it will also produce insights so profound, so beautiful, so mathematically elegant, that 3 centuries later the greatest scientific mind of a new age will invoke his name when asked about the nature of ultimate reality. The streets of Amsterdam grow quieter still. The water in the canals barely moves. Somewhere in the distance a church bell tolls the hour. The sound fades slowly into the night air. And in that fading, in that gentle dissolution of sound into silence, we can begin to sense something of what Spinoza will teach, that everything is connected, that there is no true separation between the sacred and the mundane, between God and nature, between the individual and the infinite whole. These ideas are still forming, still taking shape in the mind of a young man who does not yet know what he will become, but they are there, like seeds waiting for spring, like a melody not yet played but already written, like the slow, steady breathing of someone drifting into sleep where dreams reveal truths that waking reason cannot yet accept. The Jewish community of Amsterdam in the 1630s and 40s was unlike any other in Europe. These were not the impoverished, restricted Jews of the ghettos found in German and Italian cities. These were Sephardic Jews, descendants of the sophisticated communities of Spain and Portugal, merchants and scholars who had maintained their dignity even under the shadow of persecution. Many had lived as conversos, outwardly Christian but secretly Jewish, for generations. When they finally reached Amsterdam, they brought with them not just their faith, but their wealth, their education, their connections to trade networks spanning the globe. They built beautiful synagogues, established schools, and created a community that was both deeply traditional and surprisingly cosmopolitan. Into this world, Baruch Spinoza was born as the second son of a successful merchant. His father, Michael de Spinoza, imported dried fruit and nuts from Portugal and Spain. The family lived comfortably, not wealthy by the standards of Amsterdam's great merchants, but secure enough that young Baruch never knew hunger or want. His mother, Hannah Deborah, died when he was only 6 years old. This early loss perhaps contributed to the emotional reserve that would characterize Spinoza throughout his life. He rarely spoke of personal feelings, preferring instead the clear light of reason and logic. At the age of 7, Baruch entered the Talmud Torah school, the educational jewel of the Amsterdam Jewish community. Here, boys learned to read Hebrew, to chant from the Torah, to engage in the intricate logical debates that formed the heart of rabbinic learning. The curriculum was rigorous and traditional. Students memorized vast passages of scripture and commentary. They learned to think in a particular way, following chains of reasoning that stretched back through centuries of interpretation. A good student could trace an argument from a single word in Genesis through dozens of commentators, showing how each generation had added layers of meaning to the text. Baruch excelled at this type of thinking. His mind was naturally suited to logical analysis, to seeing patterns and connections, to following an argument to its inevitable conclusion no matter where it led. His teachers praised his brilliance. One rabbi after another predicted a great future for him as a scholar and leader of the community. But even as he mastered the traditional texts, Baruch was discovering other worlds of thought. The Amsterdam of his youth was experiencing an intellectual flowering. The city's tolerance and prosperity attracted thinkers from across Europe. Books that would have been burned in other cities circulated freely here. Ideas that would have gotten their authors imprisoned elsewhere were debated openly in coffee houses and salons. Somewhere in his late teens, Baruch began attending lectures outside the Jewish community. He studied with Franciscus van den Enden, a former Jesuit who ran a Latin school and held decidedly unorthodox views about religion and politics. Van den Enden taught his students not just Latin grammar, but the works of classical philosophers who'd lived without benefit of biblical revelation. Lucretius, who described a universe of atoms moving through infinite space with no divine purpose. Cicero, who questioned whether the gods, if they existed, cared at all about human affairs. These ancient voices spoke to something in the young Spinoza's mind. They offered alternatives to the worldview he had been taught since childhood. Through van den Enden, Spinoza also encountered the revolutionary philosophy of René Descartes. Just decades earlier, Descartes had published works that attempted to rebuild all of human knowledge on the foundation of pure reason. His method was radical in its simplicity. Doubt everything that can be doubted. Strip away all assumptions. What remains must be certain. Descartes had concluded that he could doubt everything except the fact that he was doubting, and therefore thinking, and therefore existing. I think, therefore I am. This became the bedrock upon which he built a new system of philosophy. For Spinoza, reading Descartes was like discovering a new language, one perfectly suited to expressing ideas that is informing wordlessly in his own mind. But while Descartes provided the method, the rigour, the mathematical precision, Spinoza could not accept all of his conclusions. Descartes had divided reality into two fundamentally different substances, mind and matter, thought and extension, the immaterial soul and the material body. This dualism, this splitting of existence into separate realms felt wrong to Spinoza. It created more problems than it solved. How could an immaterial mind interact with a material brain? How could thought move matter? Descartes himself had struggled with this question and never found a satisfactory answer. Spinoza began to suspect that the problem lay not in the answer, but in the question itself. Perhaps reality was not divided at all. Perhaps everything was one. These were dangerous thoughts. The rabbis of the Amsterdam synagogue were becoming aware that young Baruch was straying from acceptable paths. There were whispers, rumours. Some said he had been heard questioning whether Moses really wrote the entire Torah. Others claimed he had expressed doubts about the immortality of the soul. Whether the stories were true or exaggerated hardly mattered. The community's leaders faced a dilemma. Here was a brilliant young man from a good family, someone who could have been an ornament to the community, a defender of the faith. But instead, he was becoming a source of scandal and worry. They tried at first to reason with him. Elders of the community visited the Spinoza household. They spoke to Baruch privately, attempting to understand his doubts, to answer his questions, to guide him back to orthodoxy. When gentle persuasion failed, they tried bribes. There are records suggesting they offered him an annual pension of 1,000 florins if he would simply keep his opinions to himself, if he would continue to attend services and maintain outward conformity. 1,000 florins was a substantial sum, enough to live comfortably without working. For a young man in his early 20s, it should have been a tempting offer, but Spinoza refused. He could not pretend to believe what he did not believe. He could not mouth prayers to a God he understood in ways that contradicted everything the prayers assumed. His integrity would not permit such compromise. And so the situation escalated. The community leaders realized they were dealing not with a confused youth who could be guided back to the fold, but with someone whose dissent was fundamental and unshakable. They would have to make an example of him. They would have to show everyone, both inside and outside the Jewish community, that heresy would not be tolerated. The stage was set for one of the most dramatic moments in the history of philosophy, a moment when a young man would be forced to choose between belonging and truth, a moment that would echo through the centuries. But that moment still lies ahead, waiting in the gathering shadows, as inevitable as dawn, as final as nightfall. The 27th of July, 1656. A summer day in Amsterdam, warm and heavy with humidity from the canals. Inside the Portuguese synagogue, the community has gathered for a ceremony unlike any they have performed before. The elders sit in their places, faces grave. The scrolls of the Torah rest in the ark behind the raised platform where the cantor stands. Baruch Spinoza, now 23 years old, has been summoned. He knows what is coming. For months, the tension has been building. Conversations have ceased when he enters rooms. Former friends have begun crossing the street to avoid him. His father has been dead for 2 years now, sparing him the shame of what is about to unfold. The cantor begins to read the words of the herem, the ban, the excommunication. The text has been prepared with care, each phrase weighted with the authority of centuries of tradition. The rabbis have consulted precedents, argued over the precise wording, ensured that this pronouncement will be both legally binding and spiritually devastating. They want there to be no doubt, no room for misinterpretation. What they are about to do is final and irrevocable. The pronouncement begins with invocations of authority. By the decree of the angels and by the command of the holy men, we excommunicate, expel, curse and damn Baruch de Spinoza. The language escalates with each phrase, with the judgment of the patriarchs and with the judgment of all Israel. The entire weight of Jewish history is being brought to bear on this one young man. We curse him by day, and we curse him by night. We curse him when he lies down, and we curse him when he rises up. We curse him when he goes out and when he comes in. The Lord will not spare him. The anger and wrath of the Lord will rage against this man and bring upon him all the curses that are written in the book of the law. No one shall communicate with him orally or in writing. No one shall do him any favour. No one shall stay under the same roof with him. No one shall come within 4 cubits of him. No one shall read anything composed or written by him. The isolation is to be absolute. It is as if Baruch Spinoza has ceased to exist, as if he has died without dying, become a ghost walking among the living but unable to touch or be touched by them. For a community that had survived through solidarity, through the bonds of mutual support that held them together through centuries of persecution, this is the ultimate punishment. To be cast out is to lose everything that gives life meaning. And Spinoza? He stands and listens to the words roll over him like waves. His face, according to those who witnessed it, remains calm, almost serene. He does not weep or protest. He does not beg for mercy or promise to reform. When the ceremony concludes, he simply turns and walks out of the synagogue into the bright summer afternoon. He will never enter it again. Years later, he will write that he was compelled to nothing except by the dictates of reason. He regretted nothing. The forced expulsion from the only community he had ever known was painful, certainly, but it was also liberating. Now he was free to pursue truth wherever it led, without having to worry about offending sensibilities or contradicting doctrines. The chains of conformity had been broken, and in their breaking something magnificent was released into the world. But freedom came at a steep price. Spinoza's family connections were severed. His brother Gabriel continued the family import business but wanted nothing to do with him. The inheritance from their father was contested, and though Spinoza eventually won the legal right to his share, he promptly gave most of it away, keeping only a bed for himself. He had no interest in accumulating wealth. Material possessions meant nothing to him compared to the wealth of understanding he was beginning to acquire. He moved out of the Jewish quarter, finding lodgings first with a collegiate family, members of a liberal Christian sect that emphasized personal religious experience over rigid doctrine. Later he would move to Rheinsberg, a small village outside Leiden, where he could live quietly and undisturbed. To support himself, Spinoza learned the trade of lens grinding. It was delicate, demanding work. Raw glass had to be carefully shaped and polished to precise curvatures. The slightest error could ruin hours of labour. But there was something deeply satisfying about it for Spinoza. The work required patience, precision, attention to detail, all qualities that matched his philosophical temperament. And there was a beautiful metaphor in it. He was grinding lenses through which others could see more clearly, even as he was polishing the lens of reason through which he hoped humanity could perceive reality more accurately. The tiny telescopes and microscopes he helped create were revealing new worlds, planets and moons in the heavens, microscopic creatures invisible to the naked eye. His philosophy too would reveal a world hidden in plain sight, the infinite divine reality that expressed itself through every atom and star. His days took on a rhythm. Morning hours spent grinding and polishing lenses, afternoons devoted to reading, thinking and writing, evenings sometimes spent in conversation with friends who gathered around him, drawn by his remarkable mind and his gentle, unassuming manner. Despite his excommunication, despite the official curse that hung over his name, people were attracted to Spinoza. He had a gift for making complex ideas comprehensible. He never insisted that others agree with him, but only that they think carefully and honestly. He lived with extraordinary simplicity, eating little, wanting less. A bowl of porridge with a bit of butter, some raisins, bread and cheese. He spent almost nothing on himself, preferring to give away whatever money came to him beyond his basic needs. In this quiet, austere life, removed from the bustle of the city, freed from the demands of community and conformity, Spinoza began to write. At first he composed a treatise on Descartes, explaining and critiquing the French philosopher's system. It was published under a friend's name, with Spinoza identified only as the editor. Even then he understood the danger of putting his own name on controversial philosophical works. But the ideas pouring from his pen were far more radical than anything Descartes had imagined. Spinoza was developing a vision of reality so comprehensive, so elegant, so shocking in its implications that it would eventually be recognized as one of the supreme achievements of human thought. A vision in which God and nature were one, in which freedom came through understanding necessity, in which the highest human good was the intellectual love of the infinite whole. These ideas were taking shape now, in the silence of his rented room, in the careful movement of his pen across paper, in the grinding of lenses that captured and focused light. Everything was becoming clear. Everything was falling into place. like the slow settling of water after a storm, like the stars emerging as twilight deepens into night, like the mind releasing its grip on waking concerns and drifting into the vast undivided space of sleep. In a small room in Rheinsberg, surrounded by books and the tools of his trade, Spinoza sits at a worn wooden table. Outside, the Dutch countryside stretches flat and green under enormous skies. Inside, he is constructing something that has never existed before. A complete reimagining of the relationship between God, nature, and humanity. He writes in Latin, the language of scholars, the language that can carry precise philosophical distinctions. His masterwork will eventually be called the Ethics, though he conceives of it as something closer to geometry. Not ethics in the sense of rules about right and wrong, but ethics as the mathematics of existence, the logical structure underlying all of reality. The starting point is simple but revolutionary. There is only one substance, one fundamental reality. Everything that exists is a modification of this single infinite substance. Spinoza calls this substance God or nature, using the terms interchangeably. Deus sive natura, God or nature, not God and nature as separate things, not God above nature as its creator and controller, but God as nature, nature as God. They are two names for the same infinite, eternal, absolutely unlimited reality. This is not the God of the Bible, not the God who listens to prayers and intervenes in human affairs, not the God who gets angry or pleased, who rewards the righteous and punishes the wicked. This is something far stranger and in many ways far grander. Imagine the universe not as a collection of separate things, but as a single, seamless whole. Every atom, every star, every thought, every feeling, every moment of existence is a wave in an infinite ocean. The waves rise and fall, take different shapes, move in complex patterns, but they are never separate from the ocean. They are the ocean expressing itself in temporary forms. You're such a wave. Your body, your mind, your entire existence is a finite mode of the infinite substance. You're not in the universe, you are the universe, locally concentrated into the pattern that you call yourself. When you look at the night sky, you're not seeing something external to you. You're one part of the infinite whole perceiving another part of itself. This vision dissolves the traditional distinction between creator and creation. God did not make the world the way a carpenter makes a chair, as something separate from himself. God is the world, and the world is God. Everything that happens through the necessity of the divine nature. The laws of physics are not rules that God chose to impose on matter. They are expressions of what God is. When an apple falls from a tree, when planets orbit the sun, when neurons fire in your brain, God is acting according to his own nature. There is no gap between divine will and natural law. They are the same thing seen from different perspectives. For Spinoza, God has infinite attributes, infinite aspects or dimensions of being. But human beings can only comprehend two of these attributes, extension and thought, the physical and the mental. Your body is God expressed as extension, as physical reality following the laws of motion and causation. Your mind is God expressed as thought, as ideas following the laws of logic and inference. But body and mind are not two separate things somehow mysteriously connected. They are the same thing, the same finite mode of the infinite substance, perceived under two different attributes. When you decide to raise your arm and your arm rises, this is not a case of mind controlling matter. It is a single event in the life of God or nature, an event that can be described either in physical terms, as neurons firing and muscles contracting, or in mental terms, as a decision and an action. The event is one. Only our way of describing it is double. This understanding has profound implications. It means that everything that happens is necessary, not in the sense that some external force compels it, but in the sense that it follows necessarily from the nature of reality. Given the infinite substance and its attributes, given the state of the universe at any moment, everything that follows from that moment is determined by the laws expressing the divine nature. There is no randomness, no chaos, no divine intervention that breaks the chain of causation. Everything is connected to everything else in an infinite web of cause and effect. Does this mean we have no free will? In one sense, yes. We cannot step outside the causal order. We cannot make choices that are independent of prior causes. Our decisions arise from our nature, our desires, our beliefs, all of which have been shaped by forces beyond our control. You did not choose your parents, your genes, your early experiences, the culture you were born into. All of these things combine to make you who you are, and who you are determines what you'll choose in any given situation. In this sense, human beings are not free. We are finite modes of the infinite substance, expressing the divine nature in our limited way, bound by the same necessity that governs the fall of stones and the motion of planets. But in another sense, Spinoza offers a path to freedom. True freedom comes not from escaping necessity, but from understanding it. When you understand why things happen as they do, when you see how everything follows from the nature of God or nature, when you comprehend your place in the infinite whole, something shifts. You stop fighting against reality. You stop resenting the things you cannot change. You accept what is with a kind of serene clarity. And in that acceptance, in that clear-eyed understanding, there is a profound peace. The peace that comes from aligning yourself with the fundamental structure of existence. The peace that Einstein would later call cosmic religious feeling. This is not resignation or passivity. Understanding the causes of things allows you to work with reality rather than against it. If you understand what genuinely leads to happiness, what truly serves your well-being, you can shape your life accordingly. But you do so knowing that even this shaping is part of the infinite causal web, that you are an instrument through which God or nature acts. There is a paradox here, one that Spinoza embraces rather than tries to resolve. We are both free and determined, both autonomous agents and modes of the infinite substance. The contradiction dissolves when we stop thinking of ourselves as separate from God and realize that our freedom is divine freedom expressing itself through our finite existence. The lamp burns low on Spinoza's table. The words continue to flow from his pen, each proposition following logically from the previous ones, the whole system unfolding with the inevitability of a mathematical proof. Outside, night has fallen over the countryside. Stars emerge in their ancient patterns, the same stars that have wheeled overhead since before humans walked the earth, the same stars that will continue long after the last human voice falls silent. And in their silent turning, in their obedience to the laws of celestial mechanics, they are God dancing, God singing, God dreaming the universe into being moment by moment. Not a God separate from the dance, but the dance itself. Not a God observing the dream, but the dreaming. In the quiet of the night, in the space between thoughts, in the gentle rhythm of breathing that marks the boundary between waking and sleep, this truth can almost be felt, almost be known, almost be lived. Human beings, Spinoza observes, believe themselves to be free. We feel as if we make choices, as if we could have done otherwise than we did. This feeling is nearly universal and very powerful. But Spinoza argues that this feeling arises from ignorance. We are conscious of our desires, but unconscious of the causes of those desires. A stone thrown through the air, if it were conscious, might believe it was flying of its own free will, not realizing that its motion was determined entirely by the force that threw it and the laws of physics. We are like that stone. We feel our desires and act on them, but we do not see the infinite chain of causes that produce those desires in the first place. Consider why you want what you want. Why do you prefer certain foods, certain music, certain people? If you examine carefully, you will find that your preferences were shaped by experiences you did not choose. Perhaps you love the taste of cinnamon because your grandmother's kitchen always smelled of cinnamon rolls, and those mornings with her were moments of pure safety and love. The preference feels like it belongs to you, like it expresses your free choice. But it arose from circumstances you had no control over. You did not choose your grandmother, did not choose to be born into a family where such mornings were possible, did not choose the particular way your brain would encode those memories and link them forever to the scent and taste of cinnamon. Spinoza calls our ordinary condition the bondage of the passions. We are pushed and pulled by forces we do not understand. Anger rises in us and we lash out. Fear grips us and we flee. Desire overwhelms us and we pursue what will ultimately harm us. We are like ships tossed on stormy seas, with no rudder, no compass, no understanding of the winds and currents that drive us. This bondage is the source of most human suffering. We want what we cannot have. We rage against what we cannot change. We fear what may never happen. We are at war with reality and with ourselves, but understanding changes everything. When you understand the causes of your emotions, they lose some of their power over you. If you know that your anger arises from a feeling of powerlessness, that your fear is an echo of childhood experiences, that your craving is the result of associations built up over years, you can observe these emotions with a certain detachment. They are still there, they still arise. But they do not control you in the same way. You see them as natural events, effects following from causes, waves passing through the ocean of your being. This seeing, this understanding, is the beginning of freedom. Spinoza distinguishes between three kinds of knowledge. The first kind is imagination, the confused and fragmentary knowledge we get from sense experience and hearsay. We know that fire burns because we have been burned. We know that other people exist because we see them and hear them. This knowledge is not false exactly, but it is incomplete and easily leads to error. The second kind of knowledge is reason, the understanding of how things follow necessarily from their causes. Science operates at this level, discovering the laws that govern phenomena and using those laws to predict and explain. When you understand why fire burns, when you grasp the chemistry of combustion, you have moved from imagination to reason. But there is a third kind of knowledge, which Spinoza calls intuitive knowledge, or scientia intuitiva. This is direct insight into how individual things follow from the nature of God. It is seeing particular events not just as effects of proximate causes, but as expressions of the infinite substance. When you achieve this kind of knowledge, even briefly, the world is transfigured. You see that everything is exactly as it must be. You see the necessity and perfection of existence. You see that what you call evil is simply your limited perspective, your failure to understand how everything fits into the whole. From God's perspective, from the perspective of eternity, there is no evil, no imperfection, no randomness. There is only the infinite, necessary unfolding of the divine nature. This third kind of knowledge produces what Spinoza calls the intellectual love of God. Not an emotional attachment to a person-like deity, but a clear, calm understanding of and delight in the infinite reality of which you are a part. When you understand that you are a mode of God, that everything you do is God acting through your particular form, that your mind is literally a part of the infinite intellect of God, a profound shift occurs. The boundary between self and other begins to dissolve. You still act, still make choices, still pursue what benefits you, but there is a recognition that your individual good is inseparable from the good of the whole. Harming others is harming yourself. Blessing others is blessing yourself. Because there is, at the deepest level, no separation. This understanding is not easy to achieve. It requires sustained effort, careful thinking, a willingness to see yourself and the world clearly without the comforting illusions most people use to make sense of existence. Most human beings never achieve it. They live their entire lives in the bondage of the passions, pushed by forces they do not understand, suffering unnecessarily because they do not see how things really are. But even partial understanding helps. Even catching glimpses of the truth can reduce suffering and increase what Spinoza calls blessedness, the joy that comes from living in harmony with reality. Spinoza's ethics, then, is not a set of commandments handed down from on high. It is a description of what genuinely leads to human flourishing. Act in ways that increase your understanding. Cultivate relationships that help you see more clearly. Avoid what clouds your mind: anger, fear, envy, resentment, all the emotions that arise from confusion about what is really good for you. Seek what strengthens your power of acting and thinking. This is virtue, not obedience to external rules, but alignment with your deepest nature, which is itself an expression of the divine nature. The good person is not someone who follows rules out of fear of punishment or hope of reward. The good person is someone who understands how reality works and lives accordingly. Someone who has achieved, to whatever degree possible, freedom through understanding. Someone who has learned to love the infinite whole with the clearest part of their being, the intellect, which is eternal and shares in God's eternal nature. The room grows quieter, the thoughts slow, the boundaries soften. In the space between one breath and the next, there is a moment of perfect stillness, a moment in which the separate self dissolves into the whole, and there is only existence, only being, only the eternal now in which God or nature simply is. This moment cannot be held. It passes as all moments pass, but it leaves something behind, a memory, a possibility, a glimpse of what Spinoza promised: freedom, peace, blessedness, the intellectual love of God. Spinoza approaches human emotions with the precision of a mathematician examining geometric figures. This might seem strange at first. How can you analyze love and hate, joy and sorrow, hope and fear, as if they were triangles and circles? But for Spinoza, emotions are natural phenomena, subject to the same laws of cause and effect that govern everything else in the universe. They arise from specific causes, produce specific effects, and can be understood with complete clarity if we observe them carefully enough. There's nothing mysterious or supernatural about the human soul. It is simply the idea of the body, the mental aspect of the physical organism, and it operates according to comprehensible principles. He begins with a basic insight. We are living beings with a drive to persist in our existence. Every organism, from the simplest bacterium to the most complex human, strives to maintain itself, to continue existing, to preserve and enhance its power of acting. Spinoza calls this the conatus, the fundamental striving that defines all life. Everything you do, everything you want, ultimately traces back to this basic drive. You eat because your body needs fuel to continue functioning. You seek companionship because humans are social animals who survive and flourish through connection with others. You avoid danger because threats to your existence trigger automatic protective responses. The conatus is not a conscious choice. It is the deepest principle of your being, operating beneath awareness, shaping every desire and action. Emotions arise when this fundamental striving is helped or hindered. When something increases your power of acting, when you encounter something that enhances your ability to exist and flourish, you feel joy. When something decreases your power, when you meet an obstacle or threat to your existence, you feel sadness. These are the two basic emotions, the primary colours from which all other emotional states are mixed. Love is joy accompanied by the idea of an external cause. You love what brings you joy, what enhances your power. Hatred is sadness accompanied by the idea of an external cause. You hate what brings you pain, what diminishes your power. From these basic elements, the entire complex landscape of human emotion unfolds. Hope is joy, mixed with doubt about something future or past. Fear is sadness mixed with similar doubt. Confidence is joy arising from the idea of something future or past, about which there is no doubt. Despair is sadness arising from the idea of something we fear or hope for. On and on the analysis goes, each emotion carefully defined, each shown to arise from the interaction of the basic drive to persist with the varied circumstances of life. Envy is sadness at another's good fortune when we imagine it diminishes our own. Compassion is sadness at another's suffering, arising from the similarity we perceive between them and ourselves. Pride is thinking more highly of ourselves than is just. Humility is thinking less highly of ourselves than is just. Each emotion has its cause, its logic, its place in the system. What emerges from this analysis is both humbling and liberating. Humbling because it shows how mechanical we are, how predictable, how much our supposedly free and spontaneous feelings are actually determined by circumstances and conditioning. You are not as unique as you think. Your emotional patterns are variations on universal themes. The same forces that move you have moved billions of humans before you and will move billions after you. But the analysis is also liberating because understanding these patterns gives you power over them. You cannot stop emotions from arising. They are natural events, as inevitable as weather. But you can change your relationship to them. When anger rises in you, if you understand that it arises from a feeling of powerlessness, from a sense that something is threatening your ability to exist and flourish, the anger becomes less overwhelming. You can acknowledge it, observe it, and choose whether to act on it. When fear grips you, if you recognize it as an imagining of future harm, if you examine whether the threat is real or exaggerated, the fear loosens its hold, not because you have suppressed it or denied it, but because you have understood it. Understanding transforms the relationship between you and your emotions. They are still there, still arising, but you are no longer their slave. You have become to some degree their observer and master. Spinoza is particularly interested in emotions that arise from confused thinking. Much of human suffering comes not from actual harm but from misunderstanding. We fear things that will never happen. We resent people who never intended to harm us. We want things that will not actually make us happy. We are sad about situations we could change if we understood them clearly. This is the bondage of inadequate ideas. the suffering that comes from not seeing reality as it truly is. The path out of this bondage is the path of adequate ideas, of clear and distinct understanding. The more clearly you see, the less you suffer unnecessarily. The more you understand about what genuinely leads to flourishing, the more naturally you act in ways that promote it. There is a remarkable passage in the Ethics where Spinoza discusses the therapeutic power of understanding. He writes that an emotion which is a passion ceases to be a passion as soon as we form a clear and distinct idea of it. The emotion itself may not disappear, but it changes in quality. It becomes something you have rather than something that has you. This is not suppression or denial, which Spinoza sees as futile and harmful. You cannot stop emotions by trying not to feel them. That only pushes them into darkness where they gain power. But you can illuminate them with understanding, and in that light they become manageable, even useful. Anger understood becomes energy for change. Fear understood becomes appropriate caution. Sadness understood becomes the recognition of loss, which is the first step in healing. The highest emotions for Spinoza are those connected to understanding itself. The joy that comes from knowledge, from insight, from grasping how things fit together. This joy is different from pleasure, which is the satisfaction of bodily desires. Pleasure is fleeting and often leads to excess. The pleasure of eating becomes the pain of overeating. The pleasure of drinking becomes the misery of drunkenness. But the joy of understanding does not diminish the mind. It enhances it. It increases your power of thinking and acting. It makes you more capable, more alive, more fully yourself. And because this joy arises from activity that is entirely within your power, it is more stable and reliable than joys that depend on external circumstances. This leads to the intellectual love of God that we touched on before, but now we can see it more fully. It is the joy that arises from understanding reality itself, from grasping the infinite whole and your place within it. This love is not directed towards something external to you, because God is not external. God is the whole of which you are a part. So the intellectual love of God is really the joy of existence itself, the delight of being, the happiness that comes from seeing clearly and living in harmony with what you see. It is the highest state available to human consciousness, and it is, Spinoza insists, eternal. Because the part of you that understands, the intellect that grasps eternal truths, is itself eternal. It shares in God's eternal nature. When your body dies, this part of you returns to the infinite whole from which it is never truly separate. The wave subsides back into the ocean, but the ocean remains. And the joy of understanding, the intellectual love, is not lost but continues as part of the infinite divine consciousness. This is Spinoza's version of immortality. Not the survival of a personal self with its memories and desires, but the eternal nature of the understanding that sees beyond the personal to the universal. Night deepens. The stars wheel overhead in their ancient dance. Inside, in the quiet of thought, the emotions rise and fall like tides, each one knowable, each one necessary, each one a tiny expression of the infinite life that flows through all things. Understanding them, we are freed from their tyranny. Loving the whole that produces them, we find peace. In 1670, Spinoza published his first and only book to appear under his own name during his lifetime. The theological political treatise was a bombshell, an explosion of ideas so dangerous that it had to be published anonymously at first, though everyone quickly figured out who wrote it. The book's stated purpose was to show that freedom of thought and speech is not only compatible with public order, but essential to it. But to make this argument, Spinoza had to dismantle the authority that every government of his time used to justify censorship, the authority of Scripture itself. He approached the Bible as he approached everything else, with clear-eyed, rational analysis. The Bible, he argued, is a historical document produced by human beings in specific times and places for specific purposes. It contains much wisdom, many beautiful passages, powerful moral teachings, but it is not the supernatural revelation of God's will. It is not a textbook of theology or physics or history. It is a collection of writings by ancient peoples trying to make sense of their experience, trying to communicate moral and spiritual truths through stories and poetry and law codes suited to their particular culture. To treat it as literally true in every detail, to take its narratives as historical fact and its prescriptions as eternal commands, is to misunderstand what kind of text it is. Spinoza examined the Bible with the same tools scholars use to analyze any ancient text. He looked at inconsistencies in the narratives, at signs that different authors wrote different parts, at anachronisms that showed later editing. He argued controversially that Moses could not have written the entire Pentateuch as tradition claimed. There were passages that described events after Moses' death. There were variations in style and vocabulary that suggested multiple authors. There were historical references that only made sense centuries after Moses supposedly lived. None of this was meant to discredit the Bible's moral and spiritual value, but it was meant to show that the Bible's authority could not be used to suppress philosophical inquiry or scientific investigation. The political implications were radical. If the Bible is not an infallible guide to truth about nature and society, then religious authorities cannot claim the right to dictate what people may think or say. The state's responsibility is to maintain peace and security, not to enforce theological orthodoxy. People should be free to believe whatever they find convincing and to express those beliefs openly, as long as they obey the laws and respect the rights of others. Heresy, the crime of believing wrongly about God, should not be a crime at all, because no human authority can definitively say what is correct belief about divine matters, and because diversity of opinion, far from threatening social order, actually strengthens it by allowing the best ideas to emerge through free debate. Spinoza's argument was grounded in his understanding of human nature. People cannot be forced to believe. Belief is not voluntary. You cannot choose to believe that 2 + 2 = 5, no matter how severely you are threatened or how richly you are rewarded. You believe what seems true to you based on your understanding and experience. You can pretend to believe what you do not believe. You can mouth the words of orthodoxy while harboring doubts. But this pretense is corrosive. It makes hypocrites of everyone. It corrupts both the pretender and the authorities who demand pretense. Far better to allow open disagreement, open debate, the free contest of ideas. Truth has nothing to fear from scrutiny. If a belief is true, it will withstand challenges and emerge stronger. If it is false, it deserves to be challenged and corrected. The book caused exactly the scandal Spinoza expected. It was denounced from pulpits across Europe. It was banned in many cities. It was attacked in dozens of pamphlets and books. The Catholic Church put it on the index of forbidden books. Protestant ministers preached sermons warning their flocks against its poisonous doctrines. Spinoza was called an atheist, a blasphemer, a corrupter of morals. His name became synonymous with irreligion and impiety. Even many of Spinoza's friends were troubled by how far he had gone. Surely there must be some limits on what can be said publicly. Surely the state has responsibility to protect people from dangerous ideas. But Spinoza held firm. In letters and in conversations he defended his position. The only speech that should be restricted is speech that directly incites violence or disorder. Theological opinions, philosophical arguments, scientific hypotheses, no matter how unorthodox, should be freely expressible. The attempt to suppress ideas always backfires. It makes martyrs of those who are punished. It drives dissent underground where it becomes more extreme. It deprives society of insights that might prove valuable. The free exchange of ideas is not a threat to good government. It is the foundation of good government. Because only through such exchange can citizens develop the understanding necessary to govern themselves wisely. In many ways, Spinoza was proposing the foundations of liberal democracy before that system had fully emerged. He was articulating principles that would, over the next centuries, gradually be embodied in constitutions and legal systems. Freedom of conscience, separation of church and state, the right to speak and publish without censorship. These ideas seem obvious to many people today, at least in principle. But in Spinoza's time they were revolutionary and dangerous. He was challenging assumptions that had structured European society for more than 1,000 years. The assumption that religious and political authority were inseparable. The assumption that diversity of belief was dangerous and needed to be suppressed. The assumption that the masses could not be trusted with freedom but needed to be guided by their betters. Spinoza's political philosophy flowed naturally from his metaphysics. If everything is God or nature, if the divine is not a king on a throne but the infinite substance expressing itself through all beings, then no human ruler can claim to speak with absolute divine authority. Political power is legitimate only insofar as it serves the well-being of the people. Governments exist to protect citizens and create conditions where they can flourish, not to enforce theological dogmas or preserve the privileges of rulers. When governments fail in this purpose, when they become tyrannical or when they suppress the freedoms necessary for human development, they lose their legitimacy. This is not a call for violent revolution. Spinoza generally favoured stability and gradual reform, but it is a clear statement that political authority is conditional and limited. It rests on consent and purpose, not on divine right or inherited privilege. The theological political treatise established Spinoza as one of the founders of modern political thought. Along with Hobbes and Locke, though going further than either in his defense of intellectual freedom, Spinoza helped create the philosophical framework for the democratic, secular societies that would eventually emerge in Europe and North America. His arguments would be echoed by Enlightenment thinkers, by the framers of the American Constitution, by the advocates of free speech and religious tolerance in every generation since. Not that these struggles are ever finally won. Each generation has to defend these freedoms anew. But Spinoza gave those defenders arguments and principles that remain compelling today. The argument that truth benefits from open inquiry. The argument that diversity of opinion is a strength, not a weakness. The argument that no human authority should have the power to dictate what others must believe. These are gifts from 17th century Amsterdam to every age that comes after. Outside, the wind stirs through trees. Leaves rustle with a sound like distant voices debating, disagreeing, seeking truth through the free exchange of ideas. The sound is soothing, natural, the way things should be. Thoughts flow freely, words flow freely. In this freedom there is no chaos, only the natural order of minds seeking understanding, each contributing their small part to the infinite conversation that is human consciousness awakening to itself. For more than a century after his death in 1677, Spinoza's name was a byword for heresy and atheism. His books circulated clandestinely, read in secret by freethinkers and radicals. To praise Spinoza publicly was to risk one's reputation and sometimes one's safety. Religious authorities of every stripe agreed on little except that Spinozism was dangerous and needed to be combated. Even philosophers who were influenced by his ideas often hesitated to acknowledge the debt. It was safer to criticize Spinoza while quietly absorbing his insights. The official history of philosophy pushed him to the margins, treating him as an interesting but ultimately mistaken thinker who'd taken rationalism too far and ended up in pantheism, which most considered just a polite word for atheism. But underground, among those willing to think dangerous thoughts, Spinoza's influence spread. In the 18th century, the German writer Gotthold Ephraim Lessing admitted in private letters that he was a Spinozist. This admission caused a scandal when it became public. How could a respectable man of letters embrace such notorious doctrines? But Lessing defended Spinoza as a misunderstood genius, whose ideas about God and nature were more profound than the crude anthropomorphism of conventional religion. This defense sparked what scholars call the pantheism controversy, a heated debate among German intellectuals about the nature of God and the relationship between reason and faith. The Romantic movement discovered Spinoza and fell in love. Here was a philosopher who saw nature as divine, who rejected the mechanical view of the universe as a mere machine, who understood reality as alive with spirit and meaning. The poet Novalis called Spinoza the God-intoxicated man. Goethe read the Ethics and found in it a vision that resonated with his own sense of nature's creativity and wholeness. He wrote that he had never felt so in accord with anyone as with Spinoza, though he cautioned that one could not simply adopt Spinoza's system, but had to recreate it in one's own way. The philosopher Friedrich Schelling built his philosophy of nature on Spinoza's foundations, arguing for the unity of the ideal and the real, mind and matter, freedom and necessity. Hegel too absorbed Spinoza deeply. He famously said that to be a philosopher one must first be a Spinozist. By this he meant that anyone thinking seriously about ultimate reality must pass through the recognition that there is only one infinite substance, that everything finite is a manifestation of this infinite ground. Hegel thought Spinoza had not gone far enough, had left reality too static and lifeless, but he acknowledged that Spinoza had grasped something essential, the unity of thought and being, the rational structure of reality itself. Through Hegel, Spinozist themes entered the mainstream of European philosophy, shorn of the scandalous label but preserving the core insights. By the late 19th century, Spinoza was being reconsidered. Scholars began to read him more carefully, to see past the labels and the controversies to the actual substance of his thought. They recognized him as one of the great systematic philosophers, someone who had constructed a complete vision of reality with remarkable logical rigor. His influence could be traced in surprising places, in Romantic poetry and German idealism certainly, but also in the growing movement toward naturalism in philosophy, the attempt to understand everything, including mind and morals, as part of the natural world governed by natural laws. Spinoza's rejection of supernaturalism, his insistence on explaining everything through natural causes, made him a forerunner of scientific naturalism, even though his own metaphysics went far beyond what most modern naturalists would accept. Then came Albert Einstein. When Einstein spoke of God, when he said that God does not play dice with the universe, or that his science was driven by a desire to know God's thoughts, people naturally assumed he meant something like the traditional God of religion. But Einstein repeatedly clarified that he meant something quite different. He meant Spinoza's God, the infinite, impersonal reality that expresses itself through the laws of nature, the rational structure underlying everything, the sublime order that science discovers but does not create. Einstein felt what he called cosmic religious feeling, a sense of awe and wonder at the universe's comprehensibility, at the beauty of the laws governing everything from atoms to galaxies. This feeling was not directed toward a person-like being who answers prayers. It was directed toward existence itself, toward the fact that there is something rather than nothing, toward the mysterious emergence of order and meaning from the blind play of natural forces. In this sense, Einstein truly was a Spinozist. He believed in strict determinism, that everything happens according to natural law with no exceptions. He rejected the idea of a God who intervenes in the world, performing miracles or responding to human pleas. He saw the universe as a unity, with the same laws operating everywhere and at all times: space and time, matter and energy. These were not separate realms, but aspects of a single four-dimensional reality. His theory of relativity had shown that space and time are not containers in which events happen, but dimensions of events themselves, intimately connected and interdependent. This vision of reality as a unified field, where everything is connected to everything else, echoes Spinoza's vision of the single substance with its infinite attributes. The parallels go deeper. Spinoza argued that the more we understand the necessity of things, the less we are disturbed by them. We achieve peace through understanding that everything happens as it must. Einstein expressed similar thoughts. He wrote that a knowledge of the existence of something we cannot penetrate, of the manifestations of the profoundest reason and the most radiant beauty, this knowledge and this emotion constitute the truly religious attitude. In this sense, and in this alone, I am a deeply religious man. Both Spinoza and Einstein found in their understanding of nature's laws a source of profound meaning and solace, not because the universe cares about us, but because there is something majestic in the fact that it operates according to comprehensible principles, that reality is not chaos but cosmos, not absurdity but reason incarnate. Quantum mechanics troubled this vision. The uncertainty principle, the apparent randomness at the subatomic level, the idea that reality might not be fully determinate until it is observed, all of this seemed to contradict the Spinozist worldview. Einstein spent the last decades of his life trying to show that quantum mechanics must be incomplete, that beneath the probabilities there must be deterministic laws we have not yet discovered. He never succeeded in this quest. The scientific consensus moved away from strict determinism, but Einstein's intuition, his sense that God does not play dice, remains influential. Some physicists still search for deeper levels of reality where determinism might be restored. Others have made peace with quantum indeterminacy, seeing it as a fundamental feature of nature rather than a sign of incomplete knowledge. Regardless of how these scientific debates resolve, Spinoza's philosophical vision retains its power. The idea that we are part of something infinitely greater than ourselves. The idea that understanding brings freedom and peace. The idea that the universe is not alien to us but is our deepest home, the very substance of which we are made. These insights do not depend on the details of physics. They are responses to the fundamental questions of existence. Why is there something rather than nothing? What is our place in the cosmos? How should we live in light of what we know about reality? Spinoza offered answers that continue to resonate, not because he had the final word, but because he asked the questions so clearly and pursued the answers so fearlessly wherever reason led him. The night is very quiet now. The stars overhead are the same stars Spinoza saw through his carefully ground lenses, the same stars Einstein contemplated when he thought about the curved fabric of space-time. Light from distant suns, travelling for years or centuries to reach our eyes, each photon carrying information about its origin, about the structure of atoms, about the history of the universe. We are made of stardust, as the saying goes. The atoms in our bodies were forged in stellar furnaces billions of years ago. We are not separate from the cosmos looking in. We are the cosmos looking at itself. Spinoza knew this. Einstein knew this. And in the knowing, there is a kind of coming home. We return now to where we began. A letter from a curious child. A response from the greatest scientist of the age. I believe in Spinoza's God. Such a simple statement, yet it contains so much. A rejection of the God who watches and judges, an affirmation of the God who is reality itself, an invitation to see the universe not as a collection of dead matter ruled by a distant creator, but as a living whole, intelligent and purposeful in its own way, though not in the human way we project onto it. This God does not need our worship. This God does not promise us immortality in some otherworldly realm. But this God is not absent or indifferent either. This God is here, now, in every atom and galaxy, in every thought and feeling, in the very fact of existence itself. What does Spinoza offer us today, in a world he could never have imagined? A world of quantum computers and genetic engineering, of climate change and space exploration, of billions of humans connected through invisible networks of information. On the surface, everything has changed. The Netherlands of Spinoza's time, with its windmills and canals, its sailing ships and hand-copied manuscripts, seems impossibly distant. But human nature has not changed so much. We still struggle with the same fundamental challenges. We still face the tyranny of our passions. We still confuse what we want with what will truly make us flourish. We still suffer from ignorance about ourselves and the world. We still long for meaning and connection in a universe that seems indifferent to our existence. Spinoza teaches first of all humility. You are not the center of existence. The universe was not made for you. Your concerns, however important they feel, are tiny ripples in an infinite ocean. This could be depressing, and for some people it is, but it can also be liberating. If you are not the center, then you can stop trying to control everything. You can let go of the exhausting pretense that you're supposed to have everything figured out. You can accept your place as one small part of an incomprehensibly vast whole. And in that acceptance, paradoxically, there is a kind of expansion. You are small, yes, but you are also connected to everything. The boundary between you and the rest of reality is not as solid as it seems. You are a wave in the ocean. The wave is temporary, but the ocean is infinite. Spinoza teaches that understanding is the path to freedom, not freedom from the laws of nature, which is impossible, but freedom from unnecessary suffering, from the confusion and turmoil that come from not seeing things as they are. When you understand why you feel what you feel, when you grasp the causes of your desires and aversions, you gain space between stimulus and response. You are no longer purely reactive. You can choose, within the constraints of your nature and circumstances, how to respond. This is not absolute free will, which Spinoza considers an illusion, but it is genuine agency, the power to Shape your life in accordance with understanding rather than being pushed around by forces you do not comprehend. Spinoza teaches tolerance. If everything is God, then everything has value and deserves respect. People with different beliefs are not enemies to be converted or conquered. They are finite modes of the infinite substance, expressing the divine nature in their own unique ways. You do not have to agree with them. You can argue with them, try to persuade them, defend your own views with vigor. But you do so recognizing that they too are seeking truth, however imperfectly, that their perspective, however limited, captures something real. In a world torn by religious and political conflicts, by dogmatisms of left and right, by the conviction that only my group has the truth and everyone else is dangerously wrong, Spinoza's call for intellectual tolerance is more relevant than ever. Spinoza teaches that there is no conflict between reason and emotion, between head and heart, when both are properly understood. Emotions are not irrational impulses that reason must suppress. They are natural responses arising from our fundamental drive to persist and flourish. They become problematic only when they are based on confused ideas, when we want things that will harm us or fear things that are not truly dangerous. The solution is not to eliminate emotion, but to illuminate it with understanding. When you see clearly, when you grasp how things really work, your emotions align with reality. You love what genuinely enhances your power. You avoid what genuinely threatens it. There is no internal war between different parts of yourself. There is only the unified activity of a single being seeking to express its nature as fully as possible. And finally, Spinoza teaches what might be called cosmic piety, a reverence for existence itself. Not worship in the sense of obedience to commands or performance of rituals, but a profound appreciation for the fact that there is something rather than nothing, that the universe is comprehensible, that beauty and order emerge from the interplay of natural laws, that consciousness has arisen, allowing the universe to know itself through us. This piety does not require belief in anything supernatural. It flows naturally from paying attention, from really seeing what is here. The intricacy of a flower, the patterns in a snowflake, the birth of a star, the firing of neurons that somehow produces the experience of reading these words. Miracles, not in the sense of violations of natural law, but in the sense of wonders that call forth awe. When Spinoza died at the age of 44, his friends found the unfinished manuscript of the Ethics in his room. Within months, it was published, along with his other major works. The reaction was predictable. Denunciations, bannings, burnings. But the ideas survived. They passed from hand to hand, from mind to mind, carried forward by everyone who recognized in them something true and important. Spinoza had no children, founded no school, left no disciples to carry on his work, but his legacy is everywhere, in every argument for freedom of thought and speech, in every attempt to understand human nature scientifically, in every person who has felt that deep connection to existence that transcends the personal self, in every scientist who pursues knowledge out of love for understanding rather than profit or fame. The candle has long since burned out. The manuscripts have yellowed and been reprinted countless times. The lens grinder's workshop is gone, but the vision remains, one infinite substance, God or nature, everything connected, freedom through understanding, the intellectual love that unites the finite and the infinite. These ideas are not just historical curiosities. They are living possibilities, available to anyone willing to think carefully and honestly about the nature of reality and our place in it. You do not have to accept every detail of Spinoza's system. You can question, modify, adapt. But once you've glimpsed his vision, once you've seen the possibility of understanding the world as a unified whole in which you are included rather than excluded, something shifts. The world looks different. You look different. Everything is charged with meaning, not because a supernatural force has blessed it, but because everything is an expression of the one reality that simply is. In the quiet of this moment, in the space between thoughts, in the gentle rhythm of breath that continues whether we attend to it or not, we can feel something of what Spinoza pointed toward, not as a theory or a belief, but as a direct experience, the experience of being part of the infinite whole, the experience of existence aware of itself, simple, clear, peaceful, like returning home after a long journey, like recognizing a truth you have always known but forgotten, like the moment just before sleep, when the boundaries dissolve and consciousness merges back into the source from which it came. Everything is exactly as it should be. Everything is blessed. Everything is God, not a God separate from the world, judging and commanding, but the God who is the world, expressing infinite nature through infinite forms, dancing the endless dance of becoming and dissolving and becoming again. In this understanding, there is freedom. In this vision, there is peace. And in this peace, finally, there is rest.